And welcome to Understanding Photography with Kim Ayres, episode 256. Slight fright here as suddenly my alarm, the phone went with the alarm. It's one of these national test emergency alarm things going on today. I was warned it would happen at 3 o'clock and completely forgot. So that threw me just at the point I was flicking over to say hello. Anyway. That aside, here we are, live, as you can tell, on YouTube. If you happen to be watching live and not the recording, then leave a comment. Let me know you're here. Let me know what you're up to. Let me know what the weather's doing. And we can get the chat going. So today is a feedback session. So I'll tell you all about that. Let's make a start. So yes, that one certainly threw me. So yes, today then is a feedback session. So what we're talking about then is, two people, Inga from Norway and Nadia from Scotland, have both sent me images which I will be giving them feedback on. So we're going to talk more about that in a minute. In the meantime, like I say, if you happen to be watching live, leave a comment, let me know where you are. Remember to click like, do subscribe, all the usual kind of bits and pieces. If you happen to be watching the recording, you can also hit the like button and leave a comment down below. Obviously, I won't be able to respond to the live, the comment live if you're leaving it on the recording, but I do get notified anyway. So if there's something about the podcast you're enjoying or you're curious about, or you'd like to ask a question or leave a comment about, then do leave a comment. I think it actually even helps the YouTube algorithms if I get comments as well. So we'll see how that goes. Meanwhile, I can see we've got a couple of people in. Robert joins us from, says howdy all from a overcast, mild temperature Texas. And Inga's joined us from Oslo. Welcome, Inga. And April says greetings from a rainy Long Island, New York. Well, I have to say here in the UK, it's dreich. Well, not fully dreich. It's not that cold, but it is damp. It's overcast. It's a bit wet. So that's what it's like out the window. It just feels darker and duller than I'm used to on a Sunday afternoon. Won't be too long before I have to start switching the light on, I think, at this rate. Right, okay, so where are we? Yes, so quick update before we do anything else on the notion of smug points and where we happen to be with that. So essentially, smug points, for anybody watching who wants to know, is you get awarded smug points for the amount you contribute to these podcasts. So if you join in and just by writing hello and saying hello, you get an automatic 5 smug points. Like Marilyn's just joined us from a sunny Colorado. Hello, Marilyn. So Marilyn, and along with April, Inga and Robert all get 5 smug points just for saying it. So if you happen to be watching but you haven't actually left a hello, then you're missing out on 5 smug points. Oh, and Nadia's joined us from a dull, wet Fife. You also get smug points for Nadia and Inga will both be getting 25 smug points for sending in an image for feedback. If I set a challenge, you get 10 smug points automatically for sending in images. And if you come up with other ideas, and there's all sorts of bits and pieces, you can gain extra smug points. Those who gain the most smug points at the end of a month get to choose the challenge for the following month. And that's exactly what's happened this time. In fact, it's a little bit of an odd one, this, because tied for September's smug points were Janet and Andy, both on 70 smug points. VG and Marilyn were on 55 and Meg was in third place with 45 smug points accumulated across September. So the question was, well, how do I draw the line? Who essentially won between Janet and Andy when they both got 70 smug points? Well, what I decided to do is go with Janet on this one, basically because Andy managed to accumulate, I think it was about 60 of his 70 smug points last week. Because as well as entering the challenge, he happened to win the challenge, the judges, my idea of the challenge, but also last month I introduced the notion of a crowd vote challenge, and he won that one too. So that accumulated up to 60 points. Whereas that was the only point he turned up last month, I think. He was caught up with other things. So Janet, who'd been more consistent across the month, had accumulated the 70 points. So on balance, I've decided to award it to Janet for showing up a little bit more often. But huge congratulations to Andy. And it was a stunning image. There's no doubt about that. So yes, tie has been set. To overcome the tie was Janet. Now, what I've also, so Janet sent me a couple of ideas. So there's 2 different ideas potentially here for this month's challenge. And instead of picking one, what I've decided to do is a little bit later in this podcast, I'm going to hold a poll. So you get the chance to vote on what will be the next challenge for September. Okay, so it's only the people who are live here who can challenge. If you come and you're watching the recording, by the time you get to the end, it will have already been too late. It will be chosen. But then you can skip through and see what it is and join in anyway. But if you happen to be watching live or you want to, stick around, then later in this podcast, I will be giving you the 2 options, telling you what they are, and you'll get the chance to vote on which one you think we should use for the challenge for September. Okay, so that's all to come up. April says, wow, a tie. And Meg's joined us as well. Says, hello, everyone. Hi, Meg. Right. Okay. So, what we're going to do then is this week is a feedback session. So this is the opportunity for people to send in their images and get genuine feedback on their images. There's very few places on the internet or even in the world where you can get genuine feedback from a professional photographer and not even have to pay for it either. So it's all part of these podcasts. So if you send in an image, you're contributing. Any feedback I give you will also be useful to anybody else watching these podcasts as well. So everybody wins. That's the idea. Now, so 2 images I've got are one from Inga and one from Nadia. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to start with Inga. So interestingly, Inga, who's already said hello here, if you look back in the comments here from Oslo, Inga was one of the regulars here for quite a while when I started these podcasts. However, that was back in 2020 and 2021, first half of when I used to do this on a Tuesday night. But I think switching to a Sunday afternoon completely threw the timetable, and Inga wasn't able to carry on regularly joining in. And then went through various life upheavals, ups and downs, but she's got back in contact recently, come in with this, and is hoping to be able to sort of take part more often and kind of rejoin the group as such. So welcome back, Inga. Now, Inga's picture, now if you bear with me one moment, I'm going to move a couple of things around on the screen so that I can keep so I can find, I would have moved other things around the screen already, except for the fact that that alarm went off at 3 o'clock, which completely threw me. Inga says happy to be back. John joins us from Columbus, Ohio. Welcome, John. Okay, so what we're going to talk about, where we're going to start then, is Inga sent in 2 photos, and this is a kind of interesting. She said, I enclosed 2 photos for the feedback session to get your opinion, mostly on composition. If you only want to choose one of them, I prefer number 2. But that's okay. It doesn't have to be one of them, because both of these images, I think, surround the same idea, concept, which we want to look at. So if I flip over here, what we can see here is we've got a rock in a pool of water with a bit of rock and sky behind it. And because of the kind of really clear reflections, it almost feels like it's kind of hovering in midair. And then a second image was this one, where Inga has moved the angle slightly, so we're now looking down from above a little bit more, getting a little hint of sea in the background as well, so assuming then that this is some kind of rock pool. But I find it kind of slightly interesting for anybody, a reference point for anybody who's got one, who might get it. Anybody remember the old Yes album covers by Roger Dean back in the 1970s? You can go and look that one up if you want. But Roger Dean did a whole series. He was an illustrator, and he did a set of different images, 1 or 2 which appeared on the covers of Yes albums, where you actually had kind of like rocks, and not dissimilar to this, but sort of rocks and like rock pools, except for the fact they were hovering in the air, they were floating in the air. And I can kind of guess that he was probably inspired by something like this, where you're looking at the reflection of a rock in a pool, but you've got the sky all around it as well. So instead of doing water, he had these actually sort of sitting in the sky. Like I say, worth going and taking a look after the podcast. April says beautiful reflection, very vivid. Now, the thing about these photos, where are we at with the composition? Well, first of all, we've got this one and then the previous one. I mean, obviously with this one, there's the first thought here is you want to straighten that horizon a bit. Generally speaking, with a tilted horizon, if you're going, there are times when a tilted horizon works, but it's very rarely if it's anything less than about 20-25 degrees. If it like this, it's probably about sort of under 10 degrees. What happens is it just looks like you didn't straighten it. If you're going to go off kilter, you need to go off kilter enough so that it looks like it's been deliberately done to go diagonal with your horizon. If you're just slightly there, then it doesn't quite work. Now, interestingly, there's a kind of aspect of that as well to the rest of this, and this is what I want to explore now. And that's to do with the angle at which you're placing your camera and the relationship between the rock in the foreground and the rocks and the horizon line behind it. Because if we take a little look at this picture here, we have the rock in the foreground, and the top of the rock lines up almost precisely with the horizon of the rocks in the background. And actually, of all the places you could put it, that's probably about the worst. It's the one it's one of these where, a bit like I say with the horizon, you either make sure the horizon is straight or you make sure it's tilted in a way that people feel it was deliberately done so. What happens with the horizon, if you've got something which is lining up with something else, you either need to sort of have it below the horizon or above the horizon, clearly. Okay, and you'll tend to find that the composition works better. Now in this one, what happens is you're below the horizon, that's good, except for the fact there's a sort of secondary horizon, which is this reflection line of the bottom of the rocks. And again, you line up almost exactly with the bottom of the rocks. And what we don't see, the water sort of starts to go round, but we don't see the water around it. And again, what I would say with this is that you will need to be higher up looking down. And what you really want is to have that little bit of water that goes round behind it. Now, what I'm going to do is, in order to try and illustrate what I mean with this, yesterday I got hold of an apple, I got hold of a mirror, and I got hold of my mobile phone, and I took a bunch of little photos. So what I'm going to do is none of these photos, by the way, are meant to be, they're not award-winning, they're not things I would stick into any kind of competition. These are purely for illustration purposes. So let me show you what I mean, Inga, with this. So this is my setup before we do anything else. So all I did was I grabbed a mirror from the bathroom and an apple, and I stuck a light on a table, pushed the mirror up against the wall, and so this is just a setup. This is just to let you know what I was up to. So apple reflection. Loosely, what we're talking about here is the idea of a parallel with your rock in the pool. Now, the key thing here is what I'm going to do is I then took the photo of this apple at different angles, and what I want you to do is be with me as I go through the angles and see what difference it makes. So at this point, what happens is we have the apple with the reflection. We've got our horizon line over here, and the apple and the stalk of the apple are comfortably below the horizon line. Okay, so that as a composition kind of works. It's not bad at all. We know it's sitting on a mirror. Now, if I come down a little bit lower, there's a point where the tip of this stalk now hits the horizon line and is exactly on it. And somehow that doesn't quite work. It's sort of, there's a momentary confusion as we look at this photo where you've got this sort of T shape because we've got a strong horizon line, and then we've got the stalk, and then we've got the apple. And that tip of the stalk just hitting that horizon line kind of starts creating lines and dividing up and creating shapes which don't necessarily feel immediately comfortable. We're trying to interpret what it is we're seeing for a moment, and you're not necessarily, well, there are times when you want an idea of the viewer taking time to interpret what they're seeing. And there can be a fun side of that. But in this case, this isn't really it. This isn't trying to be clever. This just kind of feels like, yeah, not quite right. A little bit like that idea of just slightly out of horizontal horizon. Now, if I break, so the next photo here, I just break that line with the stalk, do you see suddenly it actually feels slightly more comfortable? That you kind of either want to have the stalk below the horizon or you want it breaking it, okay? But where it just sort of touches it doesn't seem to work quite as well. April says, I see what you mean, Kim. Excellent. Now, the next angle, if I drop down a bit more, the stalk is above the horizon, but the top of the apple is now hitting that horizon line in exactly the same way your first photo here is sort of touching the horizon there. Okay, so at this point, again, it's not quite working. So top of the apple, bottom of the stalk, we're hitting the horizon line at exactly the same point. And again, it just sort of feels you either want to be above it or you want to be below it. You don't just want to be clipping it. Meg says, I really like the curves of the rock, also like the reflections in the water. Yeah, it does look nice. Now, if I drop a little bit lower, now what happens, you see, is the apple starts to break above the horizon. And now it feels more purposeful. Okay? So from that to that, just that to that, starts, but it still feels pretty close. And actually, if I go down a little bit lower, like this, now I would say this feels like a slightly more comfortable composition. Okay? So you're either breaking the horizon with the stalk, or you're breaking the horizon with the apple. Okay, so, and it's a little bit like, there's a similar thing when you're doing portraits actually. You don't want to have the cutting right across the hairline in the head. If you're cropping, you either want to have space above it, or you want to kind of crop mid-forehead. What you don't want is just right up the edge, sort of an above or below a couple of millimeters. Or I can drop a little bit lower again, and now it's cutting through the middle of the apple. And that kind of works too. That now feels like we're part of our structure is the idea that this apple is now pushing through, the horizon is getting lower. And then I can go lower again. Now what's happening though is this horizon line is sort of pushing down towards the middle, but it's not quite at the middle. And this feels like a slightly odd place to have a horizon line. So, you know, actually, to me, it feels more comfortable if we're here than if we're here. Because the next obvious stage to go to, or here, which feels even worse, is here. This is the next place to go, which is where we're creating. I've now got my phone right down on the edge of the glass, and so the horizon line is basically going through the middle. So we have apple above, reflection below, line in the middle. So we're going for that notion of the symmetry, the complete symmetry here. So this is the point that I really want to make, Inga, and to anybody else watching this, that our angle of elevation is having a profound effect on that sense of composition. And there are points along that angle of elevation where it works really quite well, and points where it just doesn't. And so to start to get a sense of how that works gives you an extra little tool in your toolbox when you're back in a situation like photographing a rock in a rock pool or something. So to run back through, so straight across the horizon, we've gone for absolute symmetry, that works. Not quite symmetry, not quite working. It feels like we were going for the symmetry and we missed. This one, slightly better, but still not quite there. Once we get to about here, we've cut halfway through the apple, it feels very purposeful. It feels like this is the reason we did this, okay? If we come up here, that's okay, but we're now starting to move towards the upper part. As we come up to here, it's now kind of feeling a little bit too close, and you're kind of thinking, well, it should have been here or here, but that's not quite working. When we get to here, this is the no point. That really doesn't work. The line just feels wrong at that point. We want to be above or we want to be below. When we come to here, slightly better. now because the stalk is cutting the line and we need to have something cutting that line. Come down to here, the stalk lines up with the line, again, doesn't really work. Come back to here, it works again. So with this idea then, it becomes a case of either you want to have the elevation that allows you to see the complete surround, or you want to come down and have the point whereby it's either cutting through the middle of it, or is going for the symmetry. So hopefully then that makes a little bit of sense. So if we again, I suppose if we just flip back then to the examples of your rocks then, so we can see with this one where it's cutting the elevation there. So actually, if you got down just that little bit lower, if at all possible, obviously you're running the risk of getting your camera wet, and this is always the problem. But if it was possible to get lower and just get that rock to break above the horizon, so it's obvious that the background is behind the rock and then goes below it, and if this rock was comfortably, the top part had comfortably broken the horizon, was into the sky, I think then this composition will work much better, obviously with straightened horizon as well. And with this one, it's the opposite way round. You needed to have been that little bit higher up to allow the water to be completely surrounding it so we could see it. So I hope that all makes sense, Inga. Thank you very much for sending that image in. I think it was quite interesting for me because it took me a little while to kind of work out. I could see something wasn't quite right. I wasn't necessarily that clear about why it wasn't that right. So it took me a little while to work out, but then I was having fun with the Apple and the mirror and the phone anyway. So I hope that all makes sense. So thank you very much, Inga. Right, okay. Where are we? So, quick little reminder then that if you find these podcasts useful, interesting, entertaining even, you can support them with buymeacoffee.com/Kim Ayres. And of course, if you want to take part, if you want to send me images, you can either email me, kim@kimayres.co.uk. You can join the Flickr group, which is groups/UPwKA, and there's the Facebook group, groups/UPwKA also. So if sending images for critique or for feedback or for challenges, then place your images in any of these as well. And of course, meanwhile, don't forget to like the video if you can. That's always useful for the algorithms. And if you want, subscribe, click the little notification bell, invite your friends, all the usual kind of stuff. Oh, Inga says, really useful, thanks a lot. I tried to blend the stone and the horizon to make it unclear where it started and ended up, but I understand now why it didn't work. Okay, now that's an interesting one. If you were deliberately trying to blend the stone and the water, then essentially what you would really have needed would have been a deeper depth of field. So let me just, let's bring this up for a moment. If I do that, then what we can see here is what's making this, this part of it's really, really sharp just here, but the rock behind isn't. That's out of focus. So that's to do with your aperture settings. Now, if I can't remember exactly what but I have a funny feeling that if I click on that, does that give me any details? Okay, yes, you've got a 48mm. Oh no, right, you've got an f-stop of f.4, and you've gone for 1,400th of a second to get this. Now, for this amount of light, you could have easily created a slower shutter speed. You could have gone down to 500th of a second, 250th of a second, maybe even 125th of a second, depending on your own personal camera wobble and handshake and what have you. But certainly 200th of a second. You could still have captured this. There's no moving parts in this, and even allowing for a little bit of hand wobble, 200th of a second would have been perfectly fast enough to not worry about motion blur or anything. At that point, you would probably have been able to have an aperture of something like f7, f8, even f11. And that would have been able to give you a deeper depth of field. And that depth of field might well have allowed you to have both the stone in the foreground and the rocks in the background to both be in focus. And if they'd both been in focus, then it would have made that blend that little bit more where, you know, and again, with this one, again, we can see it's nice and sharp in the foreground, blurry in the background. So in essence, if you really wanted it to blend in that way, then it's about the idea of having the narrower aperture, which is a larger f number. So like I say, f8, f11, something, maybe f13 or something. A little bit depends on your distances, what lens you're using, how far back, whether you're zooming, whether you're going wide angle. There's a bunch of other kind of ifs and buts and what have you, but that's essentially your approach. Okay, what's Inga says, well, guess I contradicted myself with the shallow dog. Shallow dog? Rock? The shallow, that's DOG. Probably should be DOF. I'm guessing depth of field. Yes, yes. If you're wanting to blend it in, you use the shallow depth of field in order to make a subject stand out by blurring the background, so that the eye zooms in on the sharp part. Yes, Inga did mean DOF, not DOG. Right. Okay. Let me close that. So excellent. Glad that was useful. So next one then. So now what I want to do is I want to move on to Nadia, but just a wee reminder here that after I've talked about Nadia's picture, I'm going to give you the option to choose what's going to be the theme for September. Okay, so stick around, don't run off yet. There is a poll to be had. Right, okay. So let's move on to Nadia. Now, interestingly, Nadia sent me 3 different photos, although, well, one photo with the two crop variations on it. Oh, actually, was that? Inga says, but here it definitely was the horizon line. That was not the working part. Okay, cool. Right, so Nadia then sent in... right, hold on one sec. I have just managed to lose my image. Let me go back to here. Right, so yes, Nadia. So Nadia sent me this photo. So this is the original. Nadia says, I was out for a drive with my hubby, seeing as the weather was nice. We stopped at this place outside Drimmen, that's in Scotland. I only had my phone with me. So the first image, this is the original. In the second one, I tried straightening the horizon. Hold on. Second one, I tried straightening the horizon a little bit and cropped to eliminate some of the sky and to have both the grass and the tree to point towards the same circle. So we see this tree branch coming down here. Also, I removed some distracting bits of tree branches on the left. And then the third is a landscape crop using generative fill to the right hand side. I would like to know your thoughts on what I could have done to improve the crop or the image. Okay, so what we have then is we've got this sculpture at the edge of the loch. Look at the little pointy bit zooming up here. And Nadia has then created, this is her original photo taken on the phone. This is a sort of slight crop in to get rid of some distracting bits on the left and right. And here's another version which she's created afterwards in Photoshop using generative fill to say, would it have worked slightly more as a landscape image? Now, a couple of different things here, a couple of different ideas and options. And I suppose really what we're talking about is, first of all, yes, absolutely. You see something like this, you go, yes, I want to get a photo of that. You've taken the original photo, you're aware it doesn't quite feel balanced. So you've adjusted it slightly, you've made this crop, but it still doesn't quite feel balanced. Now, interestingly, even though you've tilted it to try and create a little straight horizon line there, it feels like it's sort of leaning slightly to the left. And that's partly to do with what's going on down here. And then this one, where you've cropped out, where you've gone off to the right, we have this here, but then it feels like there's quite an empty space and the balance still doesn't quite feel right. So what I'm going to do here now is I'm going to take you through a couple of different options on what you can do. VG's joined us and says, good evening, everyone. Welcome, VG. Glad you could make it. VG says, full lunar eclipse here, hoping to take a few pics. Oh, excellent. Right. Okay. Yeah. Well, it's still daytime here, so we've not got any. Can't see the moon if it is being. Well, it's not just. It's not just the fact that it's daytime, it's also the fact that it's dark and overcast here. Oh, April says, question all, I want to take a picture against an outside pink wall that belongs to an antique thrift store. I want to bring a friend and do portrait shots. Some furniture is there. What should I do? Okay, I'll tell you what, let's come back to that one. April, there's a whole bunch of questions in there. I'll carry on with Nadia at the moment, and then we can come back and see if there's any points we can get with you there. Meanwhile, Nadia then. So Nadia has got this photo, and in fact, it was this photo. So I'll tell you what we'll do. Let's open this in Photoshop, because I think there's a couple of things going on here. The very first thing we need to work out is, actually, let me just change my workspace here so that I'm not going to be blocking any part of the picture. The first thing is the working out the horizon. Now, interestingly, you thought the horizon was tilted, and I think that's because back here, but it's much more difficult to get a sense of what is a straight horizon, because what we're talking about here is the valley as it goes up. And so the water will be at slightly different levels. So if I take a line and I drag it down here, yeah, it does look like it's slightly tilted. So you would want to tilt it to the left a little bit. And also, if I take a look at this line across here, see, we've got some little kind of builder lines just up here on the stonework. It does look like if we do that, again, they don't quite line up. However, we also have the problem of the fact that if we look down here, that it still feels like it's slightly tilted off to one side. If I grab this here, we can see that if we place it on the corner of this bit here, it's then sitting below the corner there. So if we tilt this fractionally to the left, to sort of straighten that horizon bit there, something like that, what happens though is it exaggerates even more the gap over on the right. Oh, wrong one. Where are we? There we go. Now, so what's going on? Why is this not quite lining up? And there's a little trick here. A little thing that I realised is what's happening is with your phone. So what happened? You said that this was a phone photo, and I can guess that what's happening. You see, when we hold up our phone, we tend to look in the middle of it, in the same way that, especially if we are natural camera users, DSLR, mirrorless, point and shoot cameras, the lens sits in the middle of the photo, in the middle of the equipment of the camera. But with a phone, the lens sits to one side of the camera. So what happens is you've stood and essentially in the middle of the picture, and in fact, let's pull up this version of it, and you've sort of will have lined it up so that the middle of the camera is in line with this pointy bit, the center of this image, except for the fact your actual lens is then slightly off to one side of the picture. And this is one that's caught me out on several occasions. I remember going across to a vintage car show, and I thought I would get down low and I'd take some nice photos of fronts of cars. And I didn't realise until it was too late that I'd lined up my phone with the middle of the car, when actually what I should have done was line up the lens with the middle of the car, because I wanted to have that symmetrical balance. So this is an slightly old problem with this. And what it does is, because you're not lined up in the middle, is it sort of means that off to one side, you're actually getting a slight perspective distortion, like you turned something. You're sort of shooting it more at an angle. So to go back to this, what we really need to do is essentially correct the angle. So if I duplicate that layer, and then in Photoshop, Control-T or Command-T is going to allow me to make various different adjustments to it. And then what I do is I will, just to kind of make sure that I'll use this line. We'll stick that actually on that line that goes across here. Well, maybe, and what I want to also do is I want to stick one down here where we've also got that little bit where it's clearly not lining up properly. Now, with the Control-T, I can then grab, and if I hold down the Control or Command button, then I can grab a corner and I can move it around. Okay, and if I drag that down a little bit like that, I can line this up with here. Having done that, I've just pulled that one out of alignment a bit, so I can drag that up a bit, drag that down a bit, and essentially just play around a little bit until I've then got these lines on are going horizontal, the horizon is horizontal, and importantly, this base is horizontal. So essentially I've stretched out the right side of this to recompensate the fact that the lens on your phone was sitting to one side. So now I'll hit enter like that, and now this feels straighter. Okay, so that's the first thing to understand with this picture, is to get that straight horizon, we've actually got to compensate of the fact that the phone was slightly out of alignment. Now, the next thing is what we do with this shape. And it's a very symmetrical shape. Now, with your photos, this is the original, then you cropped in, but there's more space to the right than there is to the left. So this is a case of center align is not quite center aligned. And even to go back to the point we were making with Inga, so often it's a case of either you put it kind of exact, you get the horizon exactly flat, or you deliberately go off kilter. There's a similar thing with symmetry. Either go for the symmetry or be deliberately off symmetrical. And this is a not quite either. There's slightly more room to the right than there is to the left. And so that doesn't quite feel right. Now, in your other version, where you've gone to, this is making much more of a point of having space to the right. And that's fine. That works better in that sense. However, a horizon line, forgetting about the horizon line for the moment, but there is still a sort of sense of it feels more closed up at the top than it does at the bottom. Although there's similar kind of space between the bottom of this grass and the bottom of the screen as there is to the top. Because this is circular, it kind of feels like it leaves just a little bit more room to breathe. So what I'm going to do is if we come into here, I think if you're taking something like this, your options then are potentially to go properly square, or to go, I would say, even cinematic. But let's say we went square, just to show you here. Let's create a square crop. So if I bring this down, so just checking on the right so they're both right now. And then I drag this into the middle. I hold down my shift key so I can keep the ratio. And then what we do is we bring it in to something like this. So I can, using the grid lines, I can just check that what we want to have is the circle of that grid. So the grid lines are the same distance, and that's giving us that. And then if I pull this down a little bit, down here, we've now got a similar distance between the top of the sculpture to the picture and the bottom of this base. In fact, I could possibly bring that down just a touch more, something like that, and hit enter. And that, I think, gives this feel. So we're allowing the sculpture to have the symmetry, and then the asymmetry is coming from all the other parts of the image. Now, I know there's a little bit of tree here, that this branch coming over here is no longer exactly on the diagonal, but I don't think it matters quite so much, because the stronger, the more dominant part now is the sculpture into the middle. So if I just duplicate that layer again, and then quick bit of edit, if we go into camera raw filter, what we might want to do is just bring in a little bit of vignette, just kind of darken down those corners a bit so it brings our attention more to what's going on here. Possibly, what if I do auto? Ooh, no, don't like that auto. But I will add a little bit of contrast and possibly a little bit of clarity. And that has dulled it a little bit, so I might actually back in the colour, just boost the vibrance a touch, something like that. And you can see we've gone from that to that, and that just kind of brings your attention much more into what's going on. Okay, so that's possibly what you could do, is you could go square. Now, another option with this is if we go back to hold on, where do I need to go? I want to go to the our transformed delete guide. Right. So we've got our straightened image. I think another interesting option here is to actually go widescreen, go cinematic with this. So if we pull this out here and we pull this out here, and again what we're doing now is we're going to use the guidelines of this to keep it, keep this in the middle, and then we have a similar amount of gap between the top and the bottom, something like that. And now if I go to generative expand, hit enter, and then this will give us that sort of slightly better sense of what it could have looked like had you just sort of angled your phone slightly differently. Thinking about it, there we go. And again, if I just drop all that onto one layer and apply the same kind of filter idea, we end up with something like this. And here I think this is a stronger composition than your off to one side. We would normally think about the idea of maybe a rule of thirds, but I think with something like this, the sculpture is all about the symmetry. Okay, this is what the power of this image is the symmetry of the sculpture. So you need to get that sculpture as symmetrical as possible. And then you allow the asymmetry to happen with the fact that there are trees to the left and there's a bit more of a path to the right, and the shadows and the shape of the rest of the landscape. But that then just even seems to emphasize even more the symmetry of the sculpture that's within it. Okay. So ultimately, I think you either kind of go square Instagram-y style with it, or you go widescreen, but you keep it smack bang in the middle. And either of those compositions work a little bit better. But also part of that symmetry is the fact that the whole sculpture needs to be symmetrical. So when we've gone slightly off kilter because the camera is on one side rather than in the middle, rather the lens on our thing is, then basically I think this is probably more the photo you might have been kind of envisaging to go for. So I hope that makes sense. But yeah, thank you for sending that one in. What have we got here? So more questions. Okay, April also says, Nadia, beautiful landscape spot. And little bits of... so VG says, alternatively, you can add your preferences to collaborate and do... You can use an object... Oh, right, okay. VG is giving ideas to April about the... Right, okay, that's confusing me a little bit. We'll come back to that in a sec. So Marilyn says, great overall edit on the sculpture. Right, VG also says, actually, I like the landscape edit. Yeah. Right, okay, so that gives you some ideas. But thank you for sending that one in, Nadia. And I hope that's all kind of made a little bit of sense for you. Right, okay, so to go back to, just trying to work out, so to go back to April's question here then, and then I'll come on to the poll so you can vote on what you want September's theme to be. So April said, question all, I want to take a picture against an outside pink wall that belongs to an antique thrift store. I want to bring a friend and do portrait shots. Some furniture is in there. What should I do? Okay, well, a little bit depends on what is it you're wanting to do. If you're wanting to arrange bits of the furniture, or you're wanting to move bits of the furniture out of the way, then basically you need to have a conversation with the store owner and say, is it okay if? I think if you turn up and you start taking photos without you rearrange the furniture without asking, whether it's putting more furniture in or it's moving furniture out of the way, without asking, all you're going to do is annoy people. Okay, so the first thing to do is just ask, and I'm sure April, friendly, warm, you just go in being gentle, friendly, warm, and say, hey, do you mind if we do this? And even, we'll tag you in social media and make sure everybody knows what a great space you've got. I would say that's kind of the way to go about it. Quick little piece of advice about when shooting somebody up against a wall, don't have the wall too close behind them. Well, it kind of depends on the shot you're doing, but you can have, if you've got the wall right up against them. You can see shadow falls and all the rest of it. A little bit of gap between the person and the wall always makes a little bit more sense. But a lot depends on what the surrounds are. Are you just doing a headshot? Are you doing a full body shot? Think about the surrounds. So there's the surrounds, there's the wall, there's potentially other bits and pieces in the thrift store or outside the thrift store which could be adding or detracting to your image. And that's kind of the key point, is once you're there, either you've got a clear idea before you do it, or when you're there, you're working on your idea. But as you're standing there, think about the kind of image you're trying to create, and then think what in this picture is adding to the narrative, what in this picture is detracting from the narrative, what's grabbing my eye that shouldn't be grabbing my eye, or what can I put in that's going to help support the image I'm trying to get across. And generally speaking, if you come at it from that idea, with that angle, that's how you're going to get the optimum kind of picture that you're after. Okay, Nadia says, didn't think about the lens being to the side, and I do like the cinematic look. Yeah, that lens off to one side bit, Nadia, is just, it's like I say, it's caught me out in the past, which is why I know to, this is why I recognised it. Inga says, very interesting both with the phone lens thing and how to balance the photo. A nice photo, Nadia. Nadia says, thanks everyone. April says, thank you, Kim. Excellent. Right, okay, so thank you to Nadia and thank you to Inga for sending in the images, and I hope everybody else has managed to gain something else from it as well. If nothing else, then to remember about place the lens in the middle of the photo, not the phone in the middle of the photo. Right, okay, so what we're talking about now. So, as I said, ultimately, the winner of the Smug Points for August, I decided, even though it was a tie between VG and Janet, I decided I would go with Janet because Janet had consistently been putting stuff in right across the month, rather than Andy gained all his points pretty much in one go in the last week. Which isn't to say anything less of Andy's photo, brilliant photo. It's just the way I've decided to call it this month. So I got in contact with Janet and we bounced a couple of ideas, and essentially what we've come up with is she wasn't sure. There was two ideas. One was about the notion of black and white conversions. And I have talked about converting to black and white a few times, but one of the things I started thinking about this was the notion of high contrast black and white. And I don't think I've actually talked that much about this in the past. Maybe hinted at it here and there, talked about it a bit, sometimes occasionally overlapping with things like silhouettes. But I thought what I could do is I could do a podcast dedicated specifically to the idea of high contrast black and white. So instead of having the full tonal range, which is kind of what we often do with black and white, is to play with the idea of strong contrast, where the darks are dark and the lights are light, and there's not so much in the mid-range. So that's one possibility. The other possibility that Janet was asking about was the notion of intentional camera movement. So that's the point whereby you use intentional blur. Most of the time we're trying to avoid blur. Most of the time we're trying to get a shutter speed fast enough so that nothing is actually blurred. Or sometimes we do go for a blur, say like a motion blur, where we stick the camera on a tripod, we put it on a slow shutter speed so the water coming down a waterfall becomes all nice and creamy. But in those cases, we're still trying to keep the camera steady. Now, intentional camera movement is where you actually deliberately move the camera when you have got it on a slow shutter speed. Now, sometimes you can do that with panning. Janet was talking before, I think, was it Janet? Or was it you, Marilyn? Can't remember. Suddenly I've got but I think it was where that notion where if you're like following a cyclist, and if you can keep the camera moving in time with the cyclist as it moves past, the cyclist is relatively sharp and clear, but the background becomes blurred. So that's a kind of an intentional camera movement. Another one can be where you're trying to go for slightly more abstract ideas, where you say you're taking photos of trees and you flip your wrists so that you end up with a blur that goes straight and follows the lines of the trees, and you get this kind of semi-abstract kind of feel to it. So intentional camera movement is one option we can do, which we can talk about, or high contrast black and white is the other. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to do a poll. So anybody who is who is just sort of listening in the background to this, I now need to get your attention to come back to the computer screen. So ask question, which topic should we have for, I'll put topic and challenge. So what we will do is next week I will talk about whichever is chosen, and then 2 weeks after, and then set a challenge, and 2 weeks after that you can come back to it. So you can submit your images rather. So which topic and challenge, spelling, okay, and challenge would you like for September? Spelling September. Right, okay. So option 1 is I'm going to do high contrast black and white. Option 2 is intentional camera movement, sometimes called ICM. You will see these little abbreviations, ICM, in various camera, like forums and stuff like that. So hopefully now, if you are if you're watching live and you've got the chat box open, you should now have the options up. Should be able to show you that there's an option here for high contrast black and white and for intentional camera movement. So I will keep this open for a minute or so. Place your tick your option, select your option, and we'll then see which one you want to go for. And like I said, whichever one you choose for next week. So to give you a sense of what's coming up this month, next week I will then talk about it. So I'll go in depth on the idea of either high contrast black and white or intentional camera movement, depending on how the poll goes. The following week, so what is this, the 7th today, so that will be on the 14th. On the 21st, there will be no podcast. Maggie and I will be celebrating our 30th wedding anniversary, and we're disappearing off for a night away. So we won't be around for that one. So no podcast on the 21st. And then we come back on the 28th. That will be when everybody sends in their images, having responded to the challenge, having been inspired by everything we talk about next week on the 14th. So I hope that all makes sense. So, okay, we're getting a couple of people. April and Robert are both saying happy anniversary. Thank you. So let's. Any last chances? If you're wanting to put into the poll now, if you're wanting to make your vote, this is your last chance. I'm about to click end poll, and we will see what the results are. Drum roll, please. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. End poll. Okay. So, which topic would you like to go for? High contrast black and white, 60%. Intentional camera movement, 40%. Poll complete, 10 votes. Okay, so 6 of you decided to go for high contrast black and white. 4 of you have voted for intentional camera movement. So high contrast black and white it is. But it does mean the idea of intentional camera movement could possibly crop up in the future. Nadia says happy anniversary when it comes as well. Thank you. So there we go. So next week then. Next week on the 14th, I will talk about high contrast black and white. I will also, because Janet was kind of wanting to know a little bit about conversion, so I will talk about converting images. Take a look at, we'll be talking about things like what kind of images work better as black and white and what kind of images work better as a high contrast black and white. I'll run through a handful of different techniques of converting to black and white, and then how you can stretch the contrast, make them more interesting, and what to do if when you sort of move the contrast slider, the wrong bits or bits don't quite go in the way you would want them to, how to maybe correct that, and options that you have. So high contrast black and white. The 21st, nothing will be happening here because Maggie and I will be away, and then on the 28th I will come back, and you hopefully by then you will all submitted your high contrast black and white images for the challenge. And then we will do the smug points, and essentially whoever wins all these things will get to choose then the topic for October. So that's where we're at. So that's pretty much us, I think. Thank you. Quick reminder that if you find the podcast useful, interesting, entertaining, and would like to support them, then buymeacoffee.com/Kim Ayres is one of the ways you can do it. And of course, don't forget to invite your friends or find other people who used to come and watch these and drag them back again. Thank you again to Nadia and to Inga for sending in your images, and I look forward to seeing you all next week. Take care. Bye-bye.